Hello, in this video we are going to review solving subtraction equations. Please remember that an equation is a math sentence with an equal sign, and this is a math sentence with an equal sign. It is called a subtraction equation because the x is subtracting 10. Now, when doing these problems, we're going to solve it algebraically so that no matter what level of equations you eventually get to, they can all be solved the same way. So the first thing we do is we identify the variable. In problem number 1, the variable is an x. I'm going to write down an x. Then you look and see what is happening to the variable. The x is subtracting 10. So I'm going to write down that it is subtracting 10. And the way that you always solve an equation is by doing the opposite of what it's doing. So if it is subtracting 10, I'm going to write down that we are going to add 10. And this problem will be solved by knowing the variable is an x. And by knowing it is subtracting 10, we will then add 10. I'm going to make my equal signs come straight down because the more organized you are, the easier and better it is for solving equations. And if it is subtracting 10, I'm going to add 10. The reason we do this is because we always want to do the opposite. When you do the opposite or the inverse, negative 10 or minus 10 and plus 10 equals 0. They're going to cancel out. The goal is to get them to cancel out so that x minus 0 is just x, and that's how you solve. You get the x by itself. Now, there's a rule that says whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. If I'm going to add 10 on the left, I must add 10 on the right. This is called the reflexive property or the equality property of addition. And 24 plus 10 is 34. So that is problem number 1. Now, that's not always easy to follow the first couple times you see someone do a problem, so I'm going to do another example. This is x minus negative 9 equals 14. Now, the issue with problem number 2 is that it has a minus negative. And you really should not be solving equations when they have a minus negative inside of the equation, because it's usually where students make their biggest mistakes. So you want to do something called keep, change, change, which if you've learned about integers, hopefully you've learned in some form or another. It means to keep the x the same. You're going to change the minus into a plus sign, but when you do that, you must change the negative 9 into its opposite, positive 9. Once you do keep, change, change, and you turn that minus negative into a plus positive problem, when it's now an addition equation. Remember, equations get their names by what is happening after the variable. Number 1 was a subtraction equation because it had a subtraction sign. Number 2 was a subtraction equation because it had a subtraction sign. We turned it into an addition equation to get rid of that minus negative. So our variable is still an x. But what is happening to the x now? It's adding 9. And then we then write down what is the inverse or opposite of adding 9. That would be subtracting 9. And I box this in. Now, I also like to write my equal signs in first to make sure they are going straight down. And the second line here is called the equality property of addition. It is easier when doing more advanced problems, even though it's not easier when you start with regular level problems. But to think of this line always as addition. It is plus 10. It is plus 10. But right here, I said I'm going to do minus 9. So don't think of it as a minus 9. Think of it as plus negative 9. They are the same thing. If you learned about keep, change, change, hopefully you remember that. This line is always addition, and I have 9 plus negative 9. They're still inverses. They're still opposites. 9 plus negative 9 is still 0, and x plus 0 is still x. On the right side, because whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So I have a negative 9 on the right side. Now, whether you do 14 minus 9 or 14 plus negative 9, the answer is still going to be 5. And the answer to problem number 2 is 5. Lastly, you have problem 3. And problem 3 has more negatives in it, and it is the reason why we always think of this as the equality property of addition and always try to do addition. So the first thing we'll do is identify the variable. It is once again an x. And I identify what is happening to the x. Since this is just subtracting 7, I can say it is subtracting 7, and we're going to do the inverse, which is add 7. So to solve this problem, I'm going to write out this box and plan ahead of what I'm doing. So if it is, I'm going to bring down my equal signs. Bringing down the equal signs helps you keep track of the two sides of the equation. end of what you're doing. So you find a variable, it's right here, it's an x, it is subtracting 7. We'll then do the inverse or the opposite and add 7 to both sides, because whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. On the left side, a negative 7 and plus a positive 7, the signs are different, you subtract, you get 0. X plus 0 is just x. On the right side, you're adding 15 plus negative 7. The signs are different. When the signs are different, you subtract. 15 minus 7 is 8. 15 is bigger. 15 is negative, so it's negative 8. And that is how you solve subtraction equations showing algebraic steps. Now, when doing this, if you would like to write down the steps of what to do, step 1 would be to change the subtraction sign into an addition sign and change the sign of the number behind it. You really should know that whole thing, but we generally do abbreviate it down to keep, change, change. Your second step after doing keep, change, change, which by the way is optional. You'll notice I chose not to do it for problem number 1 because I only had a minus 10. I chose not to do it for number 3 because it was just a minus 7. When you're just minusing a regular number, you don't need to do keep, change, change. It really is optional, and you only need to do it when you have a minus negative. Although if I did do it, it would not change my answer. For example, in number 1, if I had made this x, if I changed the minus to a plus and 10 to negative 10, the inverse of negative 10 is still positive 10. It would not have changed my answer. So the first step of keep, change, change is optional unless you have a minus negative. The second step is find the number being added to the variable, and technically you are always being added. Even if it's minus 10, it's the same as adding a negative 10. Even if you are minusing 7, because of keep, change, change, it is the same as adding negative 7. So find the number being added or subtracting the negative. It's the same thing. The third step is to add its opposite number to both sides. That is the equality property of addition. That is that second line right there in the middle. You must show that line and you must have an equal sign in it because you need to have an equal sign to have the equality property. Lastly, once you write that line, you're just going to solve. Thank you.